These are highlights from the show you are about to view. Watch this video for an excellent summary of what it takes to work with monkeys, particularly Cat Ba Langurs, in the wild in Vietnam, as part of the Cat Ba Langur conservation project. The Cat Ba Langur, Trachypithecus poliocephalus, is endemic to Vietnam's Cat Ba Island archipelago. Neahga Leonard is the Cat Ba Langur Conservation Project Director. So, if career success to you means working with monkeys, how do you get there? Neahga describes how his career developed. His was an unconventional career path, which allowed him to acquire numerous people skills along the way. Neahga explains the skills and personal qualities a person needs to work with langurs in the wild, in a foreign country. To start off with, he likes to see new entrants with social and diplomatic skills. Cat Ba Langurs first speciated out from the Francois Langur group around 1.2 million years ago. If you are learning English as a second language, this video will be useful because you will hear two accents, a British and an American one. And before we go any further, I would like to say thank you to my subscribers. Without you, there would be no channel. I appreciate the support of each and every one of you. Managing recovering populations of Cat Ba Langur and living the wildlife looks like this.
I am the director of an organization called the Cat Ba Langur Conservation Project. We are based in northeastern Vietnam on a small island called Cat Ba Island, which is in the greater Ha Long Bay complex, which is a really popular area for tourism. It's a mature karst landscape with these amazing towers of limestone sticking up out of the water, and the main island is full of cliffs and dense forests and things. They're very difficult to navigate, but of course for the animals, that's the right habitat. In this area, the animals are endemic to the island, so only found on this one small island, and even within this small island, they're only found in a couple of small points because in the past they've been hunted out, and also not all the island is actually suitable, good habitat for them. And this is a similar situation for langurs all across most of their range. A lot of them are specialists for certain particular environments. So when it comes to work with langurs, it really depends on your particular area and your particular interest and focus and what the local pressures are on the animals.
The Cat Ba Langur species you work with is endemic to a little tiny island.
Yes, that's correct. There's quite a few species that have really, really small ranges and extremely small population numbers. For example, in my species, when our project started back in 2000, the total population was somewhere between 40 and 50 animals, closer to 40 animals total. And currently we're up to about 90 and slowly increasing. Official count 90. In practice, there's probably 5 or 6 we can't actually find at any given time. So the real number is probably a little bit higher, but only a little bit higher.
Do we know, Neahga, what the historical population size was? Were there ever very many of these Cat Ba Langurs?
So that's a really good question, and it is one of the areas of research that we need to dig into a little bit more. The island could potentially have a total carrying capacity of, say, 1,200 langurs or so. So between the carrying capacity of the island and what the genetic work shows, clearly there's some mismatch. But right now, it looks like for at least the last 100 years, we've had less than 100 animals.
Do we know when they first appeared in the fossil record?
So it looks like they first appeared, or first speciated out from the Francois Langur group around 1.2 million years ago, thereabouts. So the langurs are older than our species is.
Neahga, for the person watching this who wants to be you, please can you tell us, what do you do?
Ah, boy. So I think that's a kind of a two-part question. One part is what am I actually doing here, and the other part might be how did I get to this point? So currently I'm the director, and as a director, your job really varies a lot depending on what's needed at the particular time. So sometimes it's a bit of field work, but usually not so much because you have your staff, your employees, your local partners, your community you're working with, all that to handle all of those things. So as a director, my position is oftentimes the logistics, being the public face, making sure we have a reporting going on, making sure we deal with the politicians and the politics and the economic side of things in a way that works, makes sense, making sure my employees are well taken care of, making sure that we have good relationships with the communities we work with, and that everyone feels like they are actually given the respect that they deserve and they have earned over the course of not just working with us, but in terms of being here and the things they have done here as well. It's really, in many ways, it's a kind of a people person and management aspect. But you still have to know the ecology. You have to know what to do with the data. You have to analyze this. You have to figure out, if we're going to do research, what is the goal of the research? So it's taking all these disparate pieces and trying to lump them together and make something useful out of them that's good for us, good for the local communities, good for our local partners, and good for the animals that we work with. And we're biodiversity overall. So the langurs are a flagship species, but working in biodiversity for the entire island. In terms of how I got to this position, I had a very non-traditional approach. My background in undergraduate work was in anthropology and geology. I grew up with a lot of moving around the US and parts of Canada and things. I lived in a lot of different environments, and having the background I did with my mother and our family history, everywhere we went, one of the first things that I always learned was what's growing outside, what's living out there, what do you pay attention to, what's edible, what's not, what's poisonous, what's that weird thing making the strange noise, what lives under the log, et cetera, et cetera. Then I did a bunch of other things after undergrad. I went to China and taught English for a while at a university there. I came back and ended up working in a winery for a while. That was really interesting because we were doing conservation work on the winery grounds as well. So we were making or growing organic grapes, but then also doing habitat restoration, trying to use native species to help to protect the crop instead of using pesticides and things, restoring the habitat to make sure that we had better groundwater systems, things like that. And when I finally got tired of doing that, went to South America for a while. I volunteered in a few positions in Ecuador and Peru and Bolivia and different kinds of projects, working with bears, helping to build a research station, helping to refit a reserve that was tucked away down in part of the flatland areas of Bolivia. Came back, and after a bit of mucking around and trying to figure out what to do, finally got into grad school. So I had a very winding pathway here. And I knew that when I came out of grad school, I didn't really want to be working in the US unless it was a really interesting job. And I had for a little while in the US, I had a job working on wildlife connectivity, kind of a landscape level look at areas of landscape that are intact and protected, and areas of landscape in between that are somewhat intact and are really valuable for wildlife to move back and forth in, but aren't strictly speaking protected. So a lot of time spent talking to landowners, town planning commissions, conservation commissions, hunting groups, outdoor groups, things like this, and kind of seeing where everyone is coming from and trying to find the common ground and trying to build up systems of alliances and networks and providing resources to people or connecting people with resources they needed so they could still use their land in the ways they wanted to use their land, but also do so in a way that's beneficial to the wildlife that also need to use this land. So I think working on that is one of the skills or one of the backgrounds that really helped with getting this position, because a lot of this position is really about the community. And I think this is something people forget about in conservation sometimes, is that when you study conservation in universities and things, you're really focused on the data and the field work and the science side of it and what you do with these things and learning all the scientific names and the ecosystem functions and all these things. But when it comes to conservation, it's about people. Anything you want to get done has to really focus on getting people to understand why it's important and getting people to find some way of adjusting their behaviors to reach the goals you would like and also goals that they need as well. So I think having that background of the anthropology initially and the work in Vermont with this wildlife connectivity and wildlife pathways, working with landowners and things, helped a lot to guide my thinking for this particular position.
Neahga, what skills do you need?
You need to understand what the ecosystem is doing, understand the relationships between the species, focus more on the environment as a whole and the landscape level things. So I'm much more of a systems thinker. Understanding about people's motivations is really important. So something along the lines of anthropology or sociology, maybe even psychology is really important. Politics is really critical, especially if you're working in a country that is not your own. I'm working in Vietnam and I'm funded by Germany. So you have to kind of keep all this in your head and try and figure out, okay, what's the pathway through here? You have politics between the park and the local government, parks and the provincial government, the national government, and every single township and the parks, not to mention all the other agencies here that are also doing their own work, all of which have slightly different objectives. And then you have the economic side. Like I said, learning about people, how to deal with people, how to talk to people, the politics, the economic side, and legal side. Because when it comes to it, especially in a director position, you have to know what some of the laws are that affect your work. So these are things I think that are oftentimes left out of the conservation education side of things. And I think they're absolutely critical. You have to really have a good understanding of what people are going through to make them do the things that they're doing.
Do you ever get headaches, Neahga?
You get overwhelmed at times, yeah.
Neahga, for somebody who's coming at this thinking, I want to work with monkeys, I want to work with langurs, how does working with wild langurs differ to those in captivity? I know you're not involved in captivity, but can you shed some light on that?
The study of behavior is called ethology, and we don't really do the ethology side. We are really focused on the conservation side. So the work we do with the langurs is very much at a distance. It's in situ conservation, so it's conservation in the wild, and it's monitoring where the animals are, their movements, their home ranges, and the interactions they have with their environment and the people around them. But we're not studying behaviors or things like that. When you're working in a captive situation, you're looking at a wide variety of other behaviors as well. Animals in captivity, they don't behave the same way the wild ones do. They don't have the same level of freedom of movement that wild ones do. They don't face the same kinds of threats that wild ones. They face different ones. Reproduction can be really different. For example, in the wild here, we found that unless the group size includes at least 3 females, we don't ever see any babies in the group. But in captivity, you might have 2 animals and not have babies. Or conversely, in other species, you might have a whole bunch together and you get no babies because the captive situation is so different from the natural situation. So for us, it's completely hands-off from the animals. It's let the animals be in the wild, do their own thing, observe, monitor, and work on the people side and the environmental side around. In the captive situation, you're working oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes on things like captive breeding, establishing a backup population, potentially trying to retrain animals for introductions, which is really difficult with primates, reteaching skills that animals need to go back in the wild. In a captive situation, we'll be doing things more like that. You might be able to do a lot more studies on health and genetics in the captive situation because the animals are right there. You can do more studies on cognitive behavior, for example, because you can actually give animals tests and see how they respond to the test. In the wild, if you're doing things like that, doing it through observation, and then you're trying to make an assessment of what those behaviors mean, which can get really difficult because it's really easy to anthropomorphize animals, especially primates, because they're so much like us.
Neahga, what hard and soft skills do you find that new starters incoming into your project lack, and how can they get those skills?
Data management is actually a really important one. How you set up your databases and to use that data in the future and make it accessible in the future is oftentimes something that people don't understand very well. People that understand how to properly manage data, that's a really critical thing. And sometimes people lack that skill initially. How you interact with other people in the field is really important. They need to understand why you're there, and they need to understand that that you have respect for them and that they need to have respect for you as well. But you have to earn that respect. You don't just get it automatically. Knowing when to turn off is really important. It's really easy to get out and start working and just want to be gung-ho and really fight for what you're doing. And it's really easy to burn out that way. Obviously, technical skills are useful. GIS skills find it really increasingly useful. GIS skills, taking your data and putting it under maps and being able to query those maps and do things with that makes your work a lot easier, but it's not always as easy to do as you would like. Statistical analysis is I'm terrible at, but that's a really valuable tool, and it's something that really you get taught a lot in school, but what you get taught is not always the same things you're going to actually use. So kind of unlearning some of the things you learn and then figuring out what you're actually going to apply is really critical. Knowing what skills to unlearn and then relearn again is key. And that's, again, takes some time to figure out. Knowing a different language helps.
Neahga, to be a conservationist, do you need a college degree?
So I would say, technically speaking, no. Technically speaking, no, you don't need a degree to do the work, but it really makes things a lot easier, and it makes it much more likely you're actually going to get hired if you do have a degree.
How long is a Langur generation? And what would you like to see happen after 5 Langur generations?
So let's call a generation roughly 10 years. What I would really like to see is the animals reach a population level where they are robust to change and can handle damaging influences, whether it's climate-based or anthropogenic or disease, whatever else comes in. Whatever it is that comes in, they have enough buffer capacity in the population, they can handle the fluctuations. Right now, they can't really. The population is way too small. There's only about 40% of the island is actually good habitat for the animals. 20% of the island is kind of free of the human influence, as it were. The problem is that one of the best pieces of habitat is directly adjacent to one of the villages. That's why the animals aren't there anymore. One of the other things I'd love to see is a radical change in people's relationship to the environment. People here already know that they should leave the langurs alone. The langurs are something special. It's been many, many years building up this level of local pride, but people have not generalized that to everything else in the area. And if they don't generalize everything else, it won't help the langurs, because every animal needs to have an environment to live in. So you can't focus on the species, you have to focus on what it lives in its environment. To get that to happen, we have to get people to change the behavior. But those are the things I'd like to see happen.
Where do our knowledge gaps lie in Langur conservation?
So there's behaviors and activities and all sorts of kind of habitat they're using that we don't have a good grasp on because we can't see them doing it. And you can't even get into those areas sometimes. They're up on top of cliffs that are 200 meters tall. How they use the landscape in particular ways, but there might be two caves side by side, and they'll use one cave but not the other one. So what's going on? Why are they making this decision? Why they're using particular aspects of the landscape in certain ways would be really important. One of the things we see is changes in what they eat in the wet season and dry season. And we know that certain other primates self-medicate to deal with parasites by eating leaves that will irritate their intestinal tract and help flush parasites out. So are they eating these plants in the dry season for the water content, or are they eating them to self-medicate to flush out parasites and things? We don't know.
Assuming that getting a college degree wouldn't be a disadvantage, is it better that somebody goes for a master's or just settles for a bachelor's?
Honestly, these days, the master's is kind of what the bachelor's used to be. Even with a master's degree, it's difficult to get paid work. It's not enough to have just a degree anymore either. You have to have some experience to go with it. I mean, entry positions now start with years of experience oftentimes. It's insane. So if you're going for a degree, even more important than what level of degree you get is what experience you can accumulate along the way. You don't need a degree, but I think it is useful and important for opening the doors. But most importantly is finding ways to get the hands-on practical experience.
Neahga, what advice can you give somebody who wants to be you?
Keep an open mind. Be very aware of the fact that of all the people in the room, on whatever subject it is, you probably know the least. You might know more in aggregate, but there, on any particular subject, there's always somebody who knows more about that, is smarter about that, can handle that better, can do better. And don't feel intimidated by that. Use that as an opportunity to learn and to figure out what you can do and how both of you can benefit from that. Because there are other things you're going to know they don't necessarily know. To go with that, the understanding that wherever you go, there are going to be people that have no education, have had really rough lives, are living in a way that to you seems really basic and simple. That has nothing to do with their level of intelligence, their level of integrity, their level of effort and work, and their commitment to the things they're doing. And those people are oftentimes some of the very best and strongest allies you will ever have, and people who work the hardest to get those things done. And it's really important that you recognize that aspect in other people and encourage that and provide the opportunities for those people to express themselves wherever you can. Recognize it's going to take time. Don't give up. You may spend years looking for the work you want. Take other work. Do whatever you need to do to feed yourself, pay the bills, but don't give up on the things you want to do. And find ways to do that, even if it's not your main job, because eventually you can work around to it, but it may take a while. And I took 16 years between my undergrad and graduate work to finally get back into this again. But along the way, I found ways to make it work on small ways here and there, and always kind of kept it going at some level. Recognize that if you are going to get involved in work like this, oftentimes it means giving up other things. Conservation work does not pay very well. You have to accept that. You are not going to have the nice big fancy house and all the different toys and things you want. You have other things instead, but you won't have those necessarily. To get the opportunities you want, that may mean moving someplace where you don't necessarily want to live for a while. Or it may be someplace you do want to live, but to do that, you have to then accept a certain drop in everything else. Understand those balances and be willing to make those commitments. Because if you're not committed to the work, you shouldn't be in it.
Neahga, can you suggest a research project for an undergraduate student?
In urban areas, for example, hardscaping and groundwater infiltration and dealing with runoff and things like this are really, really important. In areas like this, figuring out how you interact, how you help guide and direct, if you can, tourism and development. You can go into, say, iNaturalist and download a whole bunch of publicly available data on species observations all around the world and delve into that data and use that to do projects. You can use all the information available that the ESA and NASA and work on remote sensing information to figure out what's happening in areas and provide planning advice for areas that deal with floods or have had fires that have taken damaged things or that are experiencing other forms of climate change that may affect animals and plants in the area.
Neahga, is there anything you'd like to add?
So my own perspective on conservation is that we need to be very careful on several levels. The one thing we need to be paying attention to is the fact that nature is not something that's out over there. We don't go out to nature. Nature is right here. Anywhere you are, there's also nature right there. There's nature inside your home. There's nature out in your front yard. There's nature in the city. There's nature in your school. We're completely surrounded and embodied and within nature all the time. So we need to kind of get rid of this artificial mental divide that we sometimes have about, I'm going to go out to nature this weekend. I'm going to go over there to do something this weekend. We need to be more internalizing it. Another really important thing for me is that we are not trying to conserve something as it was in the past. That's done, it's gone. We will never get to the past. What we are conserving for is the future. We are trying to protect the ability of the environment to resist some of the changes and be able to adapt to the changes that are coming up. As an example, sea levels are rising. Tidal wetlands are really, really valuable, important habitats for a huge range of species, and also economically as well for fisheries and things. We need to be planning for that, planning for the future, because those tidal wetlands currently will be gone, but new areas will be tidal wetlands. So we need to be protecting the current ones, not to keep them intact, because they're going to go away, but so that there is a kind of a seed resource, something that allows the ecosystem to move over and has that adaptive resilience to move into these new areas that will become the tidal wetlands in the future. And one of our roles is to make sure that those areas are not turned into parking lots and shopping malls and things like that, and industrial parks, that they are kept in a ecological condition where they can become those new resources that we need or the environment needs. So we need to be looking and planning for the future and not thinking about the past, not thinking about even about right now so much, only thinking about those things in that they inform us as to what is coming in the future and how we can adapt to the future. So I think those are the things that are really key messages for me that I'd like to get out to people to have them think about a bit more.
Neahga, you are the director at the Cat Ba Langur Conservation Project in Vietnam. Thank you so much for being on the Practical Animal channel. Neahga
My
Leonard.
pleasure, John. You have a great show, and I'm really pleased to be on here, and I hope that your listeners also enjoyed all of this.
Thank you so much, Neahga. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you.